has no way of competing with you. Several ways you may block them, and there's some important issues which I'll get to in a second. This is probably, it is the majority of economic activity in the United States in mature capitalist systems. It's inefficient, and it's precisely the invisible hand not functioning. In fact, it's right out of Adam Smith. And my favorite quote from Adam Smith is, people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion. But the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public, or in some contrivance to raise prices. So Smith, back in the old days, the father of our modern discipline, was primarily concerned with all the many ways where the invisible hand does not work, not so much with how it is guaranteed to work. And that's important, I think. So where does this monopoly power come from? I have a couple of ways. One is the natural monopoly, it's called. It's probably the least problematic. It's when size matters. Yeah? In other words, when it's efficient to produce something really big. And there's no room for anybody else serving this market. Okay. Another element is we've experienced a tremendous amount of rise in the monopoly power through mergers and acquisitions, especially in the past couple of decades. And here you have a huge split. I have a paper on this. Between jurisprudence, the rules about antitrust, about how much monopoly power is allowed. Most recently, there were a telecommunication merger that was blocked, for example. Versus 30 years of microeconomic theory conducted mostly in game theory that shows that there are many, many, many ways in which mergers and acquisitions causing giant companies is extremely problematic. It penalizes both the public, certainly, but also the investors, incidentally, who lose value, and rewards only a small group of insiders in the medium to long run. And that small group of insiders, underline that, please. Another way, in which we totally agree, we found out, is that you have this government that's dependent on monopolists' funding, right, to get elected. We are very painfully aware of this now if we watch any television, or being somewhat entertained if we watch good television such as The Daily Show. So it's essentially cheaper to lobby, right, than to innovate or compete. So why innovate or compete? Those good Smithian market habits. Right? And recent study, fascinating. The rate of return on lobbying right now in the United States is estimated at 22,000%. You spend $1 on lobbying, you get 220 back. Why bother doing anything else? Right? I don't think there's ever in history been such a rate of return for anything. So, and this is the problem with campaign finance reform. Such a extremely concentrated amount of wealth in the hands of the very few who have inordinate amount of influence and thus tend to use it to solidify their monopolies and undermine competitive markets, which again, we heard an excellent argument for why competitive markets are great. But we don't have so many of them left. And I really want to say that this is truly a non-partisan, and shocking, everybody should kind of agree, a lot of people agree about that, yet we don't seem to be able to solve the problem. You know, it's disturbing what's going on. Now, perhaps the most controversial element of monopoly. Okay, good. I'll be good. I'll be time. Perhaps the most controversial is the monopoly on owning capital. This is where I'm getting a little red here. In fact, I want you to note that until now, I consider what I did to be internal criticism. In other words, I accept markets, I accept the need for profits, but I challenge that we have counterproductive profits in action. Too much profits. The balance is out of whack. The way it's connected into the political system makes it too easy to undermine competition and create more monopoly power, and it's a vicious circle, right? Now we're moving to an external criticism. I kind of reject outright the institution of profit. There is an outright cost to it. So it's more of a radical position. Let's go. That's what I'm here for. A market system of exchange, right? That's one thing about capital, one characteristic, three characteristics of capitalism. I want to remind us that all markets have some degree of regulation, at least laws of the game, you know, rules of the game, customs often, It's everywhere. Hunter-gatherer societies have forms of market. Even Soviet Russian had a lot of markets. You know? So market is pretty ubiquitous everywhere. Throughout history too, in different ways. Last two are the more problematic, ethically certainly kind. Private ownership of means of production. Means of production being capital, money, right? It's tools of production. Sometimes money is a tool of production, but a plumber's wrench is also capital. It's a good example of capital. So, I mean, note, it's the ownership of the factories, right, of the shops, of the machines, the robots. That's the issue in question here. It's not some kind of generalized, it's bad to own stuff, private property bad. I'm sure there's some people out there who advocate that, but I think they are a minute minority, so I'll just disregard that, right? It's the particular property of means of production. And that leads consequently directly to the third kind, wage labor, right? Where the vast majority of us, actually the numbers roughly are, talking about Wall Street, 99% of Americans must work for a living. The other 1% don't have to. Most of them do. But they can go home and live off the rent, the interest from what they already own. They have that option at the very least. Okay? Now, that's where profit comes from. Like this imbalance, if you will, between a tiny minority of people who own the means of production and the others who are obliged to be employed by them. Or starve, basically. Right? And while and markets, as I said, are key institutes than everybody else. This is a very unbalanced, 99 to 1. I wonder if that's why they picked that particular ratio. And it creates this what we call a monopsony. So it's a buyer's monopoly. The buyer of labor has all the power, and the seller of labor has very little, because the lack of options, lack of choice, lack of liberty. Right? There is no liberty for the 99% in a large extent. That's my argument here. All right? And I claim, I'll stop after this, a little bit more for later, this is far from the classical ideal of a competitive market system as outlined by Smith and continued to be explored by many economists since. I'm going to stop here for
All right, there's a lot of ground to cover here. Thank you. Okay, first I'm going to start out with excessive profit. The only way to measure excessive profit is subjective opinion. And when there's excessive profit, what does that mean? It means there's excessive maladjustment of resources. So that means there's a huge benefit for society whenever someone discovers that these resources are being misused or misallocated. So I think there should be a big reward for those people, that the once-in-a-lifetime people that come around, like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, who find misallocation of resources, combine them in a new way, and create immense value for all of us. And we should reward that. I do agree with him completely on the corporatism points. Government and businesses have been working together jointly. Lobbyists is a very corrupt society. But that's corporatism. Whenever you give government the power to interfere in the economy, of course businesses are going to vie for that power and compete against each other, donating money to buy out politicians. What you got to do is you cut off the ability of politicians to interfere in the marketplace, and then there's no way that corporations can have any power over anyone else. You dictate who gets money, which companies succeed. Every time you vote or abstain from, every time you buy from a company, or any time you abstain from buying from a company, you determine their profits. At the beginning of my class, I curve all the grades in my classes. So that means if all of my students get zeros throughout the entire semester, they all get A's, right?
They shouldn't.
No, I agree to give them all A's. If they agree to all get zeros, they will all get all A's. Do you think it's ever happened? No. Why? Because you're competing. You're like, oh well, well you're right. It's actually be more effective if I say C, because then they'll try to get better. They like cheat on it. They chisel. And that's what happens in the marketplace when businesses come together. People cheat on the agreement and work again. They end up, and that's what you see with OPEC. People are constantly cheating on the OPEC agreement. Businesses can't come together. They're too greedy to say, okay, I won't sell that many product. They find ways to chisel and cheat on that to make more money. So it's precisely the greed of businesses that prevents collusion from ever happening. As far as the power of corporations, I ask you, who has more power? The mechanic inspecting your vehicle for the DMV, or the postal workers, or Apple or Google? How many of you, when you get the iTunes agreement, just click on it, I agree? 50 pages, you don't even read it. How much power do you think iTunes really or Apple really has over you? That's one of the major corporations, and you have no fear whatsoever. Yet you're sweating when you do your taxes. Corporations have zero power over you. Look at Gap, they tried to change their logo. Overnight, they had to change it back because too many customers complained. New Coca-Cola, they had to change it back because people complained. People said Microsoft was a monopoly. 5 years later, iPhone revenues are bigger than all of Microsoft revenues combined, just the iPhone revenues. The average life of an individual Fortune 500 company is only 30 years. In fact, there are only 71 of the original 1955 Fortune 500 companies still on the list today. And almost 50% of the companies on the list were replaced just from 1999 to 2009. The same things happen in income mobility. We're talking about the 1% like they're some constant group. No, the people in the 1% are constantly changing. If you take a look at mobility studies of people over their lifetime in a 15, 20-year period, the vast majority of the people in the lowest classes are moving up into even the highest classes. So it's a constant income mobility. And you can't just look at 99 versus 1%, you actually got to look at the ability of an average American in the lower classes to rise up. And when you look at that data, it's clear we have opportunity in America. The profit and loss system is working for the poorest people and allowing them to rise to the top.
Okay. In response, first of all, corporatism, that we both agree is a significant, if not the significant disease in America, does exist. You know, and so if we could stop it, I think if we reform, I honestly think if we reform the electoral way the electorate work, as well as the influence of lobbying and all those things, corporatism. Then we could deal, these things would happen. There's upward mobility, the innovation, more competition, all those wonderful things would be unleashed. So, yet I have to insist that it's here, it's dominant, and it's not going away. Hopefully yes, but not so far. So that's one point of rebuttal that I have. Another one, that's a big one because I worked like 3 years on this. Collusion does happen. That bad mouthing of profit or at least the schemes of profit by Smith. Businesses do get together to raise prices, fix prices. OPEC broke down eventually, indeed, but we are surrounded. I claim, and maybe we'll probably continue by email to argue about this. I'll send you my paper and you'll tear it apart and it'll be fun. So it's possible. In fact, that's what I meant when I said 30 years of micro-theory and game theory show that there are numerous ways. Maybe in the question and answer, ask me, hey, tell us a couple of interesting ones, and I'll be happy to. How this is achieved, where companies limit competition, cooperate amongst each other against the consumer, thus violating individual hands, allocating efficiency, etc., etc. Another kind of factual argument that we have is upward mobility. My answer is no, it's not. In fact, statistically, your chances, if you split income into, like, let's say, quintiles, right, into 5, from the poorest 20% to the richest 20%, your chances of dying at a higher quintile than your parents was at the good old days of American capitalism, i.e. 60s, after the war until mid-70s, was in the teens, low teens, and in fact it's significantly lagging in America today behind other rich countries who themselves are very much lagging also. So it's pretty abysmal. Recently, developments that are even more worrying that a lot of people are falling down in the income and wealth distribution. So they start off in middle class and end up poor in their lives. So here we have, of course, a congestion of facts, but facts are problematic and depend on interpretation, etc. Let me try and go through a quick list of ethical justification of profit, some of which were raised. And I'll skip them because we have little time here. I'll just deal with some of them. We talk a lot of this entrepreneurial creativity. And it's hard to argue against entrepreneurial creativity. But once again, I'd like to point out the engineers